Right then, this is a video which I decided to do for no apparent reason, but I'll tell you all about it. Basically, I'm sat in a Lexus RX400 Hybrid. We sell quite a lot of these, and I own one. This is my personal one here. But I'm often asked about fuel economy. So that's the point of the video. So I'm going to basically do a video and basically run it for half an hour or so, and see what fuel economy I get. I've now set it to 0. I've reset the consumption trip there. So I'm on the graph or graphics that give me kind of real-time fuel economy. So as we're sort of carrying on, the initial part of the video is basically going to be, I'll just explain about what I'm doing, where I'm doing it, why I'm asked it, that kind of thing. So to go back to the original question of, what fuel economy will you get out of a RX400? If you take the manufacturer's overall average economy figure, they rate the car as, I think it was 35 miles per gallon, which is fine and dandy. That was at a time where fuel economy tests were conducted in kind of inside in laboratories, flat road or rolling road, no wind, no external factors at all. So it is with a large pinch of salt that you tend to take those figures in. My stock answer basically for fuel economy is twofold really. Basically, it's where you drive and how you drive. So, and that's not a kind of a get out, because it really is, but that applies to any car you drive. My driving locally is basically, as I'm doing now, I've got a short 2 or 3 mile trip to the local town where I drop my kids off at school every day, come back, and then do occasional other trips. Not many, but most of my driving is actually quite short in distance, which isn't actually ideal for fuel economy, because you're running the car from cold, as by the way I am today. This is stone cold, so the engine in theory runs at its richest when it's cold as well. So obviously that I'm trying to sort of get a real figure for the car. Now my average, generally speaking, with one of these is just under 30, about 28, 29 miles per gallon. That's my personal average with the vehicle. However, as I say to everybody that looks at these cars, it really is very dependent on where you're driving. If you're someone that lives, as I do, just off a main road, and you're travelling 10, 15, 20 miles a day, you're going to carry along an A road or a few B roads, but it's nice leisurely driving, you tend to be probably just above 30. If you're lucky enough to do a really long drive every day, it's very easy on the throttle, you can get higher. So what I'm going to do today is basically I'm going to drive close to where I live. I live just off the motorway. So the first part of my trip is going to be driving along these roads, along the main road to the motorway itself. Then I'm going to drive up the motorway, up towards Gloucester, and back down the A38, which runs parallel to the M5, and see where it ends up. Now my driving style, and this is where it's very important with these cars, if your driving style is quite aggressive on the throttle and you leave braking very late, then you won't get the fuel economy that you can get out of the car. If you're fairly gentle, fairly sympathetic towards the vehicle, without being overly sensitive, without trying to drive like a little old lady the whole time, then I think that's more realistic of what you're eminently capable of getting from these vehicles. I am going to stick to the speed limits, but I'm not going to go much below them at all. So I'm going to try and just go with whatever the speed says. Motorway, I'll be going at 70-ish. I'll probably, if I can, it's not too busy, I'll set the cruise control just to try and maintain that speed as much as I possibly can. But I will be accelerating and slowing down to again mimic real world styles of driving, because it's really important with these. If you shove your foot down and get the engine and you're racing along, you will use a lot more fuel with them. Likewise, every time you hit the brakes unnecessarily, basically you're wasting the fuel that got you up to that speed. So the best, without wishing to sound patronising, the best way to drive them is constantly look ahead, anticipate. So if you see something stopped in the distance and you know it's going to be stopped for a period of time, just back off the throttle and coast towards it. If you go there right at the end and slam on the brakes, it's not the most efficient way of doing it, and it's obviously not so good for your brakes either. In terms of kind of maintenance of the vehicles, I always say that if someone's struggling to get the economy out of the car, the first place to look is at yourself. That's the first place. But if you're confident you've actually driven it really carefully and you're quite smooth with your driving, but you've noticed that the fuel economy has dropped, then obviously it highlights another issue. So the most common issues with any car, again, regarding fuel economy and what's making it suddenly get worse, tends to be, you know, the obvious thing is the engine not running quite as well as it should, and that's nearly always actually something to do with kind of air filters. It hasn't been changed in a long time, so the engine's struggling to get the air in, the combustion isn't as efficient, and that's the normal thing. I'm talking about not necessarily faults with cars, but you know, what is the obvious things on cars. The other one, actually, that you can do on a regular basis, if again you see it dipped, when you've finished a journey, get out of the car and carefully, I stress, put your hand towards the centre of each of the wheels and just see if one or others are warmer than the others. It may be that your brakes are just binding a little bit, and of course if you've got slightly binding brakes, then obviously it's a bit like driving right along with a bike with your handbrake slightly applied. It's a lot harder work to be able to do it, basically. It's also quite good to remember to do that on a regular basis, because it can save you a fortune in things like calipers and you know, discs suddenly being sort of scored because the brakes are binding on, because it's usually something really, really simple indeed, like the little pins that go in and out, the caliper pins, just one's just gone a bit tight, and it just needs basically greasing up again and freeing off, or a caliper just freeing off, and it, you know, might be a few pounds rather than many hundreds of pounds. So first part of the trip is almost complete. We're coming up towards the motorway now. That first part, which is actually slightly uphill, by the way, apart from this last little section, I've currently averaged 28.9 miles per gallon. That's 4 miles I've currently done in the vehicle. So that's kind of what I expected, really. So that's where we are. Another factor which I probably forgot to say is, clearly if you're measuring fuel economy or what you think you're trying to get on a particularly windy day, it's probably not fair on the car either, because, you know, windy days, again, exactly like being on your bike, it's a lot harder to ride a bike in windy weather than it is in you know, on a nice relatively still day. And today's actually quite calm, so it's probably quite a good way to judge it. Also, whilst I think about it, if you live in an area which is particularly hilly, you won't get the economy figures the manufacturers claim, or generally you don't, because you never seem to gain as much or recoup as much when you go back down the hills as the fuel you use to get up the hill in the first place. I don't know why, maybe it's just the way I drive, but it just never seems, someone probably explain why that is the case, but yeah, maybe it's just a lack of, you know, comparative time scales, the effort to go up as opposed to go down. So what I'm going to do at some points, because I'm not going to bore you to death with talking through the whole of the trip round, when I get onto the motorway, I'll just get up to speed, and then I'll probably turn the video off and turn it back on again just as I'm coming off the motorway, to give you a bit of an update as to where we are currently. So now I'm just at the point at which to go on. I'm currently at 29.4 miles per gallon. Again, with the Lexus, when you stop, the engine turns itself off with a hybrid system, so you're not using fuel whilst you're idling, which is a a great saving, because they are, you know, a very, very efficient engine, system rather. Again, the one thing I would say, sorry, come back to the roads. If you're driving you're commuting in the morning in heavy traffic, you're not going to get the economy either. This is based on average road conditions, not necessarily a time of sort of heavy commuting. So I'm now going to get up to 70 miles an hour and set my cruise control, which I've just done, and hopefully speak again in due course. Right then, so I'm now a mile coming off the motorway. I've done just about 8 miles on the motorway itself. Fuel economy now has gone up to 32.6 miles per gallon, and I kept it at 70 the whole way. I'm ironically just going a bit slower now because it's close to the junction, but it's a bit busy on the inside lane here. This particular section of motorway is relatively flat. There are some inclines and some dips the other side, but it's fairly typical of any kind of motorway trip. But they are, as I said, particularly efficient, constant throttle, but the law of diminishing returns definitely applies to them because they're quite a big, relatively unaerodynamic car. You know, should you be travelling at speeds above 70 miles an hour, it's going to hit your economy obviously relatively hard, as it would do with any car. But the smoother the throttle, again, I keep saying that, the better the economy you're definitely going to get. And this graph's lovely because you can see every 5 miles it tells you what your average has been. So you can see, generally speaking, it's almost like topography, something like that kind of thing, where you can see that sort of the hills that you're going up and down, because you can see the same dips and peaks on the graph here. So what I'm going to do now at the end of the slip road is I'm going to turn left and I'm going to join up on the A38 and go southbound. And it basically runs pretty much parallel to the motorway, but there's a fair bit of traffic. There's traffic lights, there's all sorts of things going on, different speed limits, a few little hills. So I'm hoping we'll be, representative again of a real mix of driving. So I will, when I finish this, I'll come back again and give an update. Right then, so quick update. I'm now up to 20 miles and travelling 60 miles an hour, which is what I'm allowed to along this section. The MPG is currently 33.8 miles per gallon. So still very, very good indeed. Traffic's light. There has been some about, but as I said, I'm not hanging about. I'm going at speed, which I think is, sensible. It's to the speed limit, but I'm not dawdling along. I'm not trying to do something unnatural. I'm trying to drive it as naturally as I possibly can, as I would. But at this stage, the economy is very, very good indeed. So on the final section, coming back into the village, which is probably another 5 or 6 miles, I'll give the final update and the final MPG figure that the car's given us. Right then, so this is the final section now, and just coming towards the end of the A38, part of which I need to drive. I'm currently up to 24 miles. I'm just going to come off here. And this takes me back into the village from where we started, albeit from a slightly different direction. The current MPG is 35.6, so Mr. Lexus wasn't lying, it would appear. As I said, I'm not doing this to try and match or get close to or prove that you can get what they say. That's not the purpose of what I was trying to do today. The fact that it is there is a nice coincidence. Just worth pointing out a couple of other things, by the way, while I'm doing this final section. I've got the air conditioning on, although it doesn't need it today. The air conditioning is working, so again, because that does draw power off the car, so it uses more fuel by using it. I've got my heated seats on, I've got a couple of electric things running in the car, again, just to try and mimic what might be the case with people, what you might be using yourself. Now, this is far from scientific. I make that quite clear. I think as much as anything else, it's really getting over the fact that what I try and encourage people to do when they buy this type of car, or diesels particularly, is it's in essence it's the smoothness of driving that is important, but without being over the top about it. You don't want to be driving the whole time, consciously thinking that, oh, I've got to be careful, I've got to back off the throttle, I've got to do, that's not what I think. That'd be the wrong thing to try and encourage, because it is it can take the joy out of driving. So when you're pulling away there, you put your foot down and go. So I always say in diesels, get up to the speed you want to go relatively quickly, so you're backing off, without just slamming the throttle down. It's the on and off the throttle, or on and off the brakes, that is the killer for economy, because it's a big heavy car, so to get it moving, to get it rolling forward, takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort from the car. Now, I'm 100% certain that should someone live, let's say, in the middle of a big town or city and was nose to tail in traffic, then the figures you'd be getting would be much, much lower. I don't know what the city figures are for this car, but I'd imagine they'd be quite low 20s. But on sort of clearer roads, but that applies equally to, I've got a little diesel Civic that I drive, and I average nearly 65 miles per gallon out of that thing. I mean, it's amazingly economical. But if I just drive short trips in town, that can be down to sort of high 40s quite quickly. But equally, if I drove around a sort of a fairly gentle loop, way above 70. So what the manufacturers, or at least some of them, are trying to say is, look, in the real world, I guess you can get these economy figures, driving to understandably the speed limits, but not driving in a 50 mile an hour zone at 25 just to get the economy. I've driven everywhere as much as I possibly could at the speed that I was allowed to do, which would be a sane speed for people to drive, but also how people would probably drive this type of car, because that in essence is what I guess frustrates me about the motoring magazines and the motoring press. When they get in and test drive these cars, they will probably only get mid-20s to the gallon, but they will boot it. They will drive it in a manner that most people wouldn't, and I think that's completely unrepresentative of what the cars are capable of. What I've done today is just try and just see what it gives, driven normally, no different to how I'd expect anyone who would buy this type of car would drive the car. You're buying it for luxury, you're buying it for to be pampered. You're not buying a sports car, far from it. It's a lovely car, but it isn't a sports car. But it is, it's a car to enjoy your driving. I'm now literally a few hundred yards from home. It's now saying 36.3 miles per gallon, which is frankly amazing, really. But as I said, that isn't why I've done it. It could equally have said 23 miles per gallon, and I've said, well, that's what you get. But that is what I've got over that trip, which has amounted to 27 miles. So it's probably a load of rubbish, but I've just done it for a bit of fun, had a bit of time, and if it's been of any help, then that's great.